So I'm David Gaston. I'm a retired head teacher, and I first decided to go out to Ukraine in March 2022. I think, like lots of people, watched the news unfold. The question arose: what can we do to help? And I think what inspired me to actually do something direct was watching thousands of people crossing the border into Poland within the first few days, and trying to figure out what we could do directly. And what we came up with was to take busloads of aid to the reception centres on the Polish-Ukrainian border, and then to help move people to their onward destinations. I've crossed the border into Ukraine 36 times. I think Ukrainian hospitality is amongst the finest I've encountered, to be honest. I've travelled very widely, I'm very fortunate, but I've never encountered anything quite as profound an experience as the hospitality in Ukraine. And I don't think that's just because of the war. I think, after having spent so much time there, it's who the Ukrainian people are. I think the hospitality is the strongest feature, and I do think that's a very strong part of Ukrainian culture. But I also have been struck by the importance of, I think, the arts, particularly music and theatre. One of the first places I was ever taken to in Ukraine were the ruins of the theatre in Bakhmut, and looking at the faces of the two guys who showed me around there. This obviously is before the Russians took over there, and seeing the profound sadness in their faces that they had lost such an important and integral part of the culture, of the cultural life of that city. Being in Ukraine, you get fed all the time. And I think it's a great way of breaking down barriers and of having opportunities to communicate directly. One of the things that strikes me most about Ukrainian food is the diversity. There is so much and such a great breadth. And I think it's very easy over here to stereotype Eastern European food, and it's completely wrong. The diversity is extraordinary, and the sophistication, I think, of the food it's what makes me put on so much weight when I'm traveling there, and it's very enjoyable. But I think, seriously, the most important thing is the way in which the hospitality helps to break down the barriers. There's a cliche, of course, about the more vodka you drink, the more you understand Ukrainian, and I guess vice versa. And I think that's probably true. But more than that, I think just that opportunity that you have, because you are always sitting down to eat with Ukrainian people. The hospitality helps to break down barriers, and part of that is food and drink. And it does so because it brings people together. And it brings people together to share. And it's one of the most intimate things that you can do in a kind of public space, is share food and drink together. And I think from our perspective, from a visitor's perspective, just the enjoyment of the food to start with. It's an opportunity to talk about and to start a conversation. What is your food like? Do you have food like this? And so on and so forth. It's a great way to break down barriers.
What is your favorite dish in Ukraine?
I don't know about a favorite. I thought about this several times. I've been asked, what is my favorite dish? And I'm not sure that I've got one. It's easy to say things like the vareniki, and I do like them. I really, far too much. I tell you what I really like, because it reminds me of my childhood a lot, is the preserves. The preserve things like tomatoes and vegetables, because we don't get those anymore. And it reminds me of a time when we did have those things, and I love them. I think one of the most important things for me is to deliver aid directly whenever I can, either to civilians or to soldiers. Partly because you know that you've got the aid there, partly because it gives you an opportunity to interact with people. And the reception is always extraordinarily kind and grateful. No one wants gratitude. You just want to know that it's going to do some good. And some of the feedback I've received over the last 3 years has been fantastic. We had some feedback recently from a soldier who said one of the tourniquets you delivered has just saved somebody's life. Lost their hand, saved their life. Just to know that one of, I don't know how many thousands of tourniquets I've delivered over 3 years, but just that one is worth it. And another message I got the other day from somebody was that they had opened one of the boxes of that had, I don't know, something like 200 hemostatic bandages. And that the writer said, I opened it and burst into tears. Getting that kind of feedback is so important, because not for me, I see it in people's eyes when I'm handing stuff over, but for the people who are back home, who either donate money or they buy things to donate, they never get to see or hear. So when we can write back to people to say, hey, that stuff you bought, or that stuff you passed on to us, this is what it did for somebody. That's really important. Whatever happens in the future, and I hope this war ends very quickly, and I hope it ends as best it can for the Ukrainian people. But the experiences I've had have been so moving and will stay with me forever. And there have been moments, mostly, of course, children, where I do have to stop for a moment. All right, I'm just going to have to give me a minute. Yep. There are times when I'm outside of it, and I'm sure everybody is the same, where you just think of these moments. Little boy, in a little village not far from Chasifyar. You've seen the photograph of him. 8 years old, you know, and then I turn around and his little sister's in a pram, and I've got a clip of film of that, and in the background you can hear artillery non-stop. And I've got a photograph, a lovely photograph of an old lady from Chasifyar, in fact. And we tried to get her to leave with us, and she wouldn't go. And she said to Arthur, the guy who was with me, because obviously she didn't speak English and I couldn't understand her. And I said, what did she say? What did she say? And she said, if she's going to die, it'll be with the sun on her face. And I will never forget that, because she did. The Russians launched an attack as we left, and she was killed, I was told later. And she could have come with us, but I think she would have said, why? I'm probably mid-80s, why would I bother? You know? I think when you hold events where the British people can interact with Ukrainian people, obviously there are opportunities to share culturally and food and so on. But I think there is a real danger that, because what is happening in Ukraine is not on the news every day, and if you want to find it, you have to dig, it's easy for it to slip out of people's minds that this is going on. And when people come together, there are opportunities to share experiences and to remind British people what's really going on. And far more important than that is when you actually meet people, it becomes real, as opposed to something I saw on the television or heard about on the radio. When you meet people who will say, yeah, well, I left my mother in Kyiv, or my brother died fighting in the East, it brings it home far more. It's a much more powerful experience. And I know it doesn't necessarily reach a big audience, but even those smaller audiences will talk about those events. They will talk about those conversations and the experiences and say, I met somebody today who has got a sister fighting on the front, whose mum is still in Kyiv, whose dad died last week, and so on. And I think that will do more to help British people understand what Ukrainians are going through than anything else. That's why cultural events like that are so important. I would add one thing to that, and that is go into schools. If you want to influence going to schools, that has more influence in the longer term, because if you take some of what you've done elsewhere in schools and get kids cooking, baking, talking, watching that film from last year, those sorts of things together, and leave them with a positive experience. because you're up against disinformation and misinformation. So there will be kids in school, the Ukrainians, yeah, well, they're going to lose anyway, aren't they? If you're in schools talking a much more positive story and an interesting story and a story based around food and experiences and so positive things, what they leave in and go home with is, I met some Ukrainians today. They came into school and they were doing cooking with us, and they've got a massive range of food and so on and so forth. And one of the guys, his brother's fighting on the front at the moment. It's terrible. They go home and tell these stories, and they're positive. Well, that bit isn't, but they're positive stories. And for me, that has a more profound and more lasting effect than anything else, because they're the people who in 10 years' time will either be coming out with positive or negative messages.